Hello my friends, this is Karen. Today I'm going to share with you a topic that not many people are familiar with, and this is what is an executor and what does it mean to be an executor of a will? Well, it is an honor to be chosen as an executor for someone's will. It is also a heavy-duty role that requires patience and diligence in carrying out the responsibilities. Well, anyone can be appointed as an executor as long as they are above 21 years old, not a bankrupt, and is of sound mind. The person writing the will can pick an executor whom he or she knows personally, or a professional executor like a lawyer or a trust company that's licensed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. As an executor in Singapore, you play a very crucial role in administering the estate of a deceased person and ensuring that the assets are distributed according to his or her wishes stated in the will. Now, the duties of an executor can be fairly complex. Below is a checklist to guide you through the process of executing a will in Singapore. Keep in mind that this is a general guide, and it is recommended that you seek legal advice or consult with a qualified professional to ensure compliance with the most current laws and regulations. Here goes. This is the checklist of the key duties of an executor in Singapore. Number 1, locate the will. The executor will need to find the original will and ensure that it is valid and legally recognized. If the deceased person did not have a will, then the estate will be distributed according to the intestacy laws. Number 2, read the will and understand the deceased instructions. As an executor, you have to identify your responsibilities. You have to read the will and understand the responsibilities and the instructions given to you by the deceased. And third on the checklist, the executor has to make the funeral arrangements. Well, you may find it odd, but the executor will have to make the funeral arrangements as instructed in the will by the deceased. If the will does not spell out any funeral arrangements, then you, the executor, will have to do what is fitting. You may claim the costs of the funeral arrangements from the estate of the deceased. Next, the duty of the executor is to obtain all the relevant documents that are needed for the application of the grant of probate in the next stage. Well, these documents include, but are not limited to, the following: originating summons, statements and supporting affidavit, results of any probate caveat and applications such as the schedule of assets, administration of oaths, affidavits and consents of co-administrators or renunciations filed, if any, certified true copy of the death cert or order of court for presumption of death of the deceased, certified true copy of the will and codicil, and including any translation certified by a lawyer, foreign grant for resealing a foreign grant of probate, if any, inheritance certificate for the Muslims, and any other required supporting documentations. Moving down the checklist, number 5, apply for a grant of probate. The grant of probate is an important court order that the executor has to obtain, as it legally recognizes you and therefore empowers you as the executor to carry out the instructions in the will. The 6th duty of an executor is to identify and secure the assets. The executor needs to create an inventory checklist of all the assets owned by the deceased, such as insurance policies, investments, personal belongings, and properties. So the executor has to safeguard and maintain these assets well throughout the entire administration process. Next on the checklist, the duty of an executor is also to notify relevant parties, inform banks, government agencies, financial institutions, and the relevant parties about the death of the individual and your role as the executor. Next up on the checklist, the executor needs to settle debts and taxes. The executor needs to identify and pay off any outstanding debts, liabilities, and taxes of the deceased from the estate. Now, this is a high priority because the executor cannot distribute any assets to the beneficiaries unless all debts have been settled. After all debts have been paid, the next thing that the executor needs to do is to give notice of intention to distribute the assets of the deceased. This is a legal requirement, and it gives the beneficiaries an opportunity to object to the distribution. Next, one of the key, important, and highly crucial duties of an executor is to be able to manage and distribute the assets. He or she has to ensure that the assets are managed prudently throughout the entire administration process. Now, once the debts and outstanding liabilities are settled, executor can then go ahead to distribute the assets, the remaining assets or the estate, according to the terms of the will. Another duty that the executor needs to be aware of is this, and that is to keep accurate records. He or she has to maintain detailed records of all the financial transactions, distributions, and communications related to the estate. These records will be necessary when it comes to accounting to the beneficiaries and to the court. Now, by doing so, the executor is safeguarding himself or herself from any potential legal proceedings or challenges. And this leads me to the next point, where an executor needs to be able to handle legal matters, as well as to be able to communicate efficiently, effectively, and accurately with the beneficiaries. Another important duty of the executor is to be able to file all the necessary documents. And what I mean by this is that the executor needs to lodge all the required documents with the relevant government authorities, such as tax filings and finalizing the administration with the court. Well, we're down to the last two duties of the executor in this checklist. The other duty that the executor needs to perform is to do a final accounting and distribution of the estate. The executor needs to prepare a final account of the estate's assets, income, expenses, and distributions, and provide this to the beneficiaries for approval. Once approved, then the executor can distribute the remaining assets to the beneficiaries accordingly. And finally, the executor will then close the estate. Once all the tasks have been completed, the executor will seek court approval for the final distribution and then formally close the estate. Remember, the duties of an executor can be legally binding. Hence, it is essential that as an executor, you carry out the tasks with diligence and due integrity. Here are some additional tips for executors in Singapore. You can seek professional legal advice if you need it. The execution of a will can be complex and a time-consuming process, depending on the size of the estate and its complexity. Engaging a lawyer experienced in probate matters will be immensely beneficial and help ensure that the entire process is carried out smoothly, professionally, and in compliance with the law. The administration of an estate can be complex and time-consuming, so it is advisable for the executor to be organized, to be efficient, as well as to be patient. And here's a note to the testator or the creator of the will. If the size of your estate is large, sizable, and there are complex issues, then you should consider hiring professional executors and trustees instead. Well, I hope this video has given you a better idea of what is involved when you are an executor of a will in Singapore. You can head to karentang.sg and read my blog on the same title. Till next time, have a wonderful week ahead and take care. Bye.